Washington, D.C., what was expected to be a routine televised policy discussion turned into one of the most talked about moments in recent political memory on Tuesday night. Senator John Kennedy of Louisiana left Vice President Kamala Harris visibly flustered and searching for words after pressing her with a series of pointed legal questions during a live CNN town hall on justice reform. The exchange, broadcast coast to coast, sparked a national conversation about competence, preparation, and the limits of political rhetoric under pressure. The event, hosted by CNN's Dana Bash, was designed to focus on the Biden administration's approach to criminal justice policy and police accountability. The atmosphere in the Washington studio was formal but tense. Viewers expected a civil conversation between the vice president, who once served as California's Attorney General, and Senator Kennedy, a member of the Senate Judiciary Committee known for his sharp-witted and incisive questioning style. What unfolded, however, was something far more dramatic. From the moment the discussion began, Kennedy's demeanor was calm and controlled, his trademark Southern politeness masking the precision of a seasoned prosecutor. Harris appeared confident at first, greeting the audience with her familiar laugh and measured optimism about reimagining justice in America. But as the questions grew more specific, her composure began to waver. "Madam Vice President," Kennedy began, leaning slightly toward his microphone, "you've spoken often about equity in sentencing and police accountability. But could you clarify, under current federal law, what's the distinction between qualified immunity and absolute immunity for law enforcement officers?" The question hung in the air for a moment. Harris smiled, adjusted her blazer, and began to respond. "Well, Senator, I think what's important here is that we ensure our law enforcement officers are held accountable, while maintaining the integrity of their work." Kennedy interrupted politely, his voice calm but firm. "I appreciate that, ma'am, but I didn't ask about principles, I asked about the distinction in legal terms. What's the difference between qualified and absolute immunity?" The audience leaned forward. The vice president hesitated, looked down at her notes, and attempted to redirect. "Well, as you know, this is a complex issue involving many legal doctrines." Kennedy smiled faintly. "It's actually not that complex, ma'am. Qualified immunity protects officers from liability, unless they violate clearly established constitutional rights. Absolute immunity applies to prosecutors and judges in the course of their duties. Surely, as a former Attorney General, you'd be familiar with that distinction." The silence that followed was uncomfortable. Harris blinked, smiled again, and attempted to pivot. "Senator, I think the bigger issue here is reforming the system so that accountability—" Kennedy, still composed, raised an eyebrow. "Reforming the system begins with understanding it, doesn't it?" A low murmur rippled through the studio audience. Dana Bash attempted to ease the tension, moving to another topic, but the exchange had already set social media ablaze. Within minutes, clips of the moment were circulating online with headlines, like "Kennedy schools Harris on basic law" and "Awkward silence on live TV." As the discussion continued, the dynamic remained unbalanced. Kennedy, methodical and unyielding, used his time to probe legal nuances in Harris's proposals. "You've proposed federal oversight commissions," he said at one point. "What statute or constitutional authority would empower such commissions to review local law enforcement decisions?" Harris, clearly unsettled, spoke about collaboration and partnership with states, but again avoided specifics. Kennedy countered, "So there isn't an existing federal statute, it's an idea you'd like Congress to create." She nodded hesitantly, and he pressed again, "Wouldn't that raise 10th Amendment issues?" The vice president's answer trailed off into generalities about unity and cooperation. The audience, and even some of the panel's legal analysts, seemed to sense the imbalance. By the midpoint of the event, the tone had shifted from conversational to analytical. Kennedy's questions resembled a courtroom cross-examination, while Harris's answers sounded increasingly defensive. At one point, a visibly frustrated Harris attempted humor. "Senator Kennedy, I see you've done your homework." Kennedy's response, delivered with a gentle smile, was cutting in its simplicity. "I always do, ma'am." After the broadcast, political commentators from across the spectrum began dissecting the exchange. On CNN's post-event panel, analyst David Axelrod tried to soften the damage. "Look, Kamala Harris is incredibly intelligent," he said. "She's thinking strategically about big-picture reform." Kennedy's focusing on the legal technicalities, which is his home turf. But others were less charitable. Conservative commentator Ben Shapiro tweeted, "Kamala Harris just got wrecked on national TV by John Kennedy. If you can't define qualified immunity after serving as AG, maybe you shouldn't be VP." Even some traditionally liberal voices expressed concern. Former Obama advisor Van Jones admitted, "That was rough. Kennedy came in with specific legal points, and she didn't seem ready for them." By Wednesday morning, the clip had amassed over 40 million views across platforms. The phrase "she didn't know" began trending on X, formerly Twitter. Hashtags like #KNEDYVSHARRIS, #LIVETVMELTDOWN, and #LEGALBASICS dominated the political conversation online. Reporters outside the White House later that day pressed the vice president's team for comment. Her communications director, Jamal Simmons, attempted to downplay the incident. "The vice president was focused on the moral and policy dimensions of the issue," he said. Senator Kennedy was interested in semantics. But even Democratic aides privately conceded that the optics were bad. One campaign strategist, speaking off record, told Politico, "She looked unprepared. That's the kind of clip that sticks, especially when people already question her authenticity." Later that week, Kennedy was asked about the encounter during a radio interview in Louisiana. He chuckled softly before replying, "Look, I don't enjoy embarrassing anyone. But if you're going to lecture America on justice reform, you ought to understand the law first." What made the exchange so impactful, according to political communication experts, was its contrast of styles. Kennedy, a law graduate from the University of Virginia and Oxford, often masks his intellectual sharpness beneath his folksy charm. Harris, by contrast, relies on rhetorical flourishes and moral appeals. When stripped of talking points, she appeared less confident. "Television is brutal," said Dr. Elaine Murray, a professor of political communication at Georgetown University. Kennedy's questions were surgical. Harris's responses were conceptual. The public doesn't reward abstraction in moments like that, they reward clarity. In the following days, the White House attempted to pivot. Harris made several public appearances highlighting her leadership on women's health and education, steering clear of legal discussions. Still, the moment haunted her press coverage. Late-night shows replayed the clip repeatedly. Conservative outlets labeled it the gaffe heard around the nation. Inside Washington, Democratic operatives reportedly urged the vice president to schedule fewer unscripted interviews. "Every time she's off teleprompter," said one strategist, "there's risk." Republican senators, meanwhile, rallied around Kennedy. His office reported a surge in online engagement and donations. The Louisiana lawmaker told Fox News that he was just doing his job and that public officials should be able to answer simple questions about the laws they want to change. Despite efforts to move past the incident, the confrontation's cultural resonance persisted. Editorials debated whether Kennedy had crossed a line or simply exposed a gap in expertise. The Washington Post described it as a case study in political accountability, while the Wall Street Journal called it a masterclass in calm interrogation. Even months later, clips of the exchange remained viral. Political science professors began using it in classroom discussions on debate strategy and rhetorical pressure. "It's a textbook example of preparation meeting performance," said Dr. Murray. Kennedy understood the subject, controlled his tone, and never raised his voice. That's why it worked. For Harris, the fallout lingered longer than expected. When asked in a subsequent interview about lessons learned, she responded carefully, "We all have moments where the conversation doesn't go as planned. What matters is continuing to fight for what's right." It was a diplomatic answer, but it didn't erase the viral footage. Meanwhile, Kennedy's popularity in conservative circles soared. His approval ratings in Louisiana rose by several points, and clips of his questioning style became social media staples, often captioned with phrases like "Kennedy with the KO" and "Southern gentleman," "legal assassin." Political insiders predict the incident will be remembered not merely as a viral moment, but as a turning point in public perception of both figures. For Harris, it underscored a vulnerability, a struggle to connect legal expertise with communication under pressure. For Kennedy, it reinforced an image of sharp intellect wrapped in disarming charm. In the unpredictable theater of American politics, one moment can redefine careers. Tuesday night's televised exchange between John Kennedy and Kamala Harris may go down as precisely that kind of moment, a rare instance when live television peeled back the rehearsed layers of politics to reveal something raw and unscripted. The contrast between mastery and message. As Kennedy walked out of the CNN studio that night, he reportedly told a producer with a wry smile, "I reckon people just want straight answers." For millions watching across the country, that was exactly what they saw, and what they didn't.